In this lesson, we're going to look more closely at the significance of the invasion of Cuba at the Bay of Pigs. So these are the four individuals that were responsible for the events involving the Bay of Pigs invasion. You should be able to name all four. You should be able to put some dates on them and understand their context in the wider case of the Cold War. You pause now and see if you can identify them. Okay, so we have Fidel Castro, the man who led the Cuban Revolution of 1959, overthrew Batista, who was popular with the Americans. And in order to improve the lives of many poor Cubans, he took over many American businesses. Secondly, we have President Kennedy. Now he becomes president in 1960, and he is the youngest president in American history. Many people are very skeptical of his abilities, and like all presidents, he has to impress his own people that he's strong and also people abroad. He will inherit President Eisenhower's plans to overthrow Castro. It was Eisenhower who put together the planned invasion of the Bay of Pigs by Cuban exiles. JFK, unwilling to provoke the Cubans and the Russians, withdrew American air support, which will critically affect its chances of success. And finally, we have Nikita Khrushchev, the man who inherits control of the Soviet Union from Joseph Stalin. It is Khrushchev who has to look strong. It is Khrushchev who has to try and seize the initiative in the Cold War, and does so by taking the Cold War out of Europe and into the Caribbean, into America's backyard. This is as much a story of personal rivalry between these individuals as it is of ideology. So where are the Bay of Pigs? There's the Bay of Pigs on the southern coast of Cuba, and we know that Florida is up here to the north, only about 90 miles. So the Bay of Pigs invasion takes place in April 1961. In January 1961, the US broke off diplomatic relations with Cuba. Before his presidency ended, Eisenhower authorized the CIA to organize a scheme which would train Cuban exiles hostile to communism to take part in an invasion of Cuba. Critically, no American ground troops would be involved in the operation, so Eisenhower could claim that America had nothing to do with it. When Kennedy took over from Eisenhower in January 1961, this scheme was already running ahead to a timetable. Kennedy had very little input on it, and the only contribution he made was to amend the scheme, amend the operation ever so slightly, but critically in withdrawing American air support. The exiles being trained were men who had left Cuba in 1959 when Castro had seized control. So they were men that had been loyal to Batista. Their aim was to remove Castro, and the plan was for them to land in Cuba and create an uprising against Castro. The Americans believed, or hopefully believed, that Castro was unpopular. They were trained by the CIA in Florida and in Guatemala, a country in Central America, with a budget of $45 million. Collectively, these Cuban exiles were known as La Brigada, the brigade. The failure of the Bay of Pigs. The CIA-backed invasion failed. Castro was tipped off that the invasion was planned. Russian agents had found out the dates and the information and the location of the Bay of Pigs invasion, and Khrushchev had told Castro to be prepared. The US did not provide air support and attack the Cuban Air Force. Therefore, when La Brigada landed, the Cuban Air Force was able to take advantage of no American air cover. The Cuban forces, ready for La Brigada when they arrived at the Bay of Pigs, were over 20,000 strong, and La Brigada, despite their American weapons training, was simply no match for them. So why did the Bay of Pigs invasion fail? Castro and the Cubans knew it was going to happen. Kennedy had not planned the Bay of Pigs operation. Eisenhower did, and Eisenhower was worried about escalating the Cold War. Hence, he pulled the American air support. The CIA were convinced that the Cuban people would rise up against Castro. but they fatally misjudged Castro's popularity. La Brigada's supply ships were sunk by the Cuban Air Force, which, according to Eisenhower's plans, should have been shot down before they'd even taken off by the American Air Force. The American air cover was pulled. There were too many Cuban troops. Which do you think is the most important reason? Now, on the worksheet you have, or the PDF that you will have all of these reasons to do with the pair of pigs. Some of them are causes, some of them are consequences. What you need to do is read through the statements and identify which is which are the causes, which are the consequences. And then that needs to go into or onto your worksheet. You can do a cut and paste activity, you can do a handwritten version, you can do a summary version. The template is provided for you. You need to do it in your own particular way. I need to know ultimately, however, the most important cause and the most important consequence. The PowerPoint attached to this lesson will then go on to do some exam practice with a mark scheme.